Pitching a book to your library is not all that different than pitching to a bookstore. But, whereas bookstores need to sell books in order to pay the rent, libraries need their products and services to engage with patrons. And this episode is all about how you can engage with your library. Ask not what your library can do for you, but ask what you and your books can do for your library.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 406 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode, I'm going to be doing more sharing from the book, A Book in Hand, and I'll explain a little bit about that after a word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by the Toronto Indie Author Conference, happening April 26th and 27th, 2025 in Toronto at Beaton Hall, Toronto Reference Library. Are you an independent author navigating the complexities of the publishing business? Do you dream of transforming your passion for writing into a thriving author business? Don't miss this opportunity to immerse yourself in the world of Canadian indie publishing's first author business conference. This conference will feature presenters and authors and professionals from all over the place, including Becca Syme, Elena Gallia, J.F. Garrard, J.M. Frey, Mallory Cooper, Rachel Renner, Dao Wong, Tara Kremen, and myself, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. It is a fantastic conference. This is the second annual one, and you can check it out at torontoindieauthorcon.com. Don't miss out this fantastic opportunity. Okay, so in terms of a short personal update, I'm not going to get to comments from recent episodes, but I will get to them in a future episode. But I did receive comments from folks who quite enjoyed last week's episode, which was a solo episode where I just read an excerpt from my book, A Book in Hand. So I'm running out of time. So many things on my plate, so challenging to spend the time editing some of the amazing interviews I have coming up. And I do want to get back on track. Maybe I just need to not sleep for 4 or 5 days. Yeah, that'll probably help. But related to A Book in Hand, I do have to share this personal update because, oh my God, I almost smashed things. And I was really upset. I said a lot of choice adult words. Liz was sleeping in the other room when it happened, and she was panicked. What's wrong? Because of the screaming and yelling that I did. Here's what I did because of stupid Microsoft and their bullshit save documents. I had been working on an update to A Book in Hand and saving the updates I'd added. I probably spent about 8 hours making additions and updates and changes and wrote some stuff. And then I had to reboot my computer for something to save the document. But when I reopened it, it reopened a whole bunch of my Word documents for me automatically, and it had a those temporary copies of the documents, and I didn't do more than a cursory glance at it, but thought, I probably didn't save that last hour of work, so I just went back and I saved it as the actual save document, but this backup copy was about a month and a half old. So I lost about a month's worth. Not a full month's worth. It was only about 8 hours worth of work. But I lost 8 hours worth of work. And I didn't freak out immediately. I panicked immediately. But then I went to see how could I possibly find the real backup version that I had, but I didn't have a copy of that anywhere. And that's when I lost my mind. And I put the book aside, and I haven't been able to pick it up in several days now because I'm still so upset over the lost work, and I just had to go work on other projects. I have no shortage of other projects to work on, but I went and worked on other projects in the meantime. And I'm going to go back, and I'll go back to square one. This has happened to me before. I've lost entire stories and chapters of books and things like that. I will go back, and I will work on it, and maybe it'll be even better this time. But this is just a reminder and a warning to you to try to have a duplicate or a clone backup so that if you screw something up like I did, and again, I'd only had one coffee in me. It was early in the morning, and I saw the thing because I guess it rebooted overnight or whatever, and I went, oh, cool, thank you, Microsoft, for helping me with this. And what I should have done is I should have gone and checked, or there's even a process where you can do a comparison to see the differences between two documents. But in my haste of trying to just get there so I could work on the manuscript, which is what I had planned to do that early morning, is I screwed it up, and it's my fault. I like to blame the technology. I like to blame Microsoft and all of that, but it really is my fault for not double checking before I went and overwrote a document. But anyways, that's one of the frustrations that happened. But one of the great things that happened is I got some feedback from people who really enjoyed that excerpt from A Book in Hand. And so, with love and passion, of my love and passion for bookstores and libraries, as well as for making sure I provide content that's valuable to you, dear listener, I'm going to read the excerpt from that long chapter. And in this particular case, it's going to be the library section, because I did the bookstore section first. Now I'm going to do the library section. But while I've got you, just before I get to the main content, I want to share with you that on Sunday, March 16th, 2025, I'm going to have a live chat with my dear friend Kevin J. Anderson. We're going to have a virtual beer together. It's going to be, again, Sunday, March 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And there'll be a link in the show notes here. I already sent that to everyone via my Patreon feed. It's over on my YouTube channel. And you can come and hang out with Kevin and I. You can bring your own virtual drink. And Kevin and I are going to talk a little bit about a long-term passion project that's decades long, related to an epic adventure, fantastical trilogy that he is re-releasing the definitive penultimate edition of, along with 3 CDs of progressive rock, working with some incredibly talented people from the music industry, including, yes, Canadian Sass Jordan as well. And Kevin's very passionate about storytelling and writing, but he's also really passionate about music. Kevin and I, of course, bonded over Rush lyrics and the music Rush and craft beer and stuff like that. So we're going to have this live conversation, and then we're going to be talking about Kevin's project, all the work he's put into it with his wife Rebecca and the team at Wordfire Press, as well as this dynamic, new, exciting Kickstarter that's currently live. And in the first 15 minutes, he funded it, and it's at over $50,000 US as I record this. We're going to talk about that and obviously the changes in the publishing industry and why and how Kevin has readapted. Instead of he used to make a living off of the advances that he would get from traditional publishers, and he's now looking at these Kickstarter projects as advances for things he really wants to write. Like one of his previous Kickstarters was for the ultimate short story collection, a 7-book volume of Kevin's short fiction that he's published since he was a kid. So includes pretty much everything he's ever had published as a writer. So the definitive short fiction collection that no publisher in their right mind would ever publish, and yet I think he earned over $70,000 to get that book, to get those books out. And I have the beautiful signed hardcover editions right here in my library because I'm a book nerd and collector, and is like, now I have the definitive, well, at least up till 2024, the definitive Kevin J. Anderson short story collection. But again, this Terra Incognita epic adventure. We're going to be talking about that, having a beer, and then you live, if you tune in live, you'll be able to ask questions as well and join us for that virtual toast. And again, that's coming up on March 16th, 2025. And don't worry, if you missed the live, you can still go back and watch that video on YouTube. It will become an episode of the podcast, so if you just prefer to listen and enjoy, you'll get the benefit of that. But that is it for the introductory matter. I'm going to jump right over to playing the bumper and then reading that excerpt from my book, A Book in Hand. The library. Like a bookstore, a library is a place where patrons can access books and other cultural materials. Most public libraries are funded in a manner to provide valuable services to their local communities. These services come in the way of reading material as well as other resources such as music, movies, internet access, public use computers, and printers. In recent years, many libraries have continued to expand in their offerings. For example, one of the local branches of the Waterloo Public Library where I live has a free audio recording studio that community members can book, as well as allowing patrons to be able to check out ice skates and other sporting equipment. Whereas bookstores need to be able to sell products to stay in business, libraries thrive on community engagement. Success in a library, particularly when it comes to books and publishing related materials, has to do with whether an item is borrowed, checked out, or leveraged in some way by a patron. A book that sits on a library shelf and which has never been checked out is not bringing value to that library nor to its community. It's just taking up space. But a book that is in high demand and is requested and borrowed by patrons is one that is held in high regard. Again, while it's not about selling the product, it's about ensuring that the product is used. For that reason, when I consider strategies for authors when thinking about their local library, I like to break that down into three main areas: availability, awareness, and acquisition. Before we explore those realms, I want to first remind you of the importance of being engaged in some way with your local library. One of the first things I do when I move to a new community, as I did in 2018 when I relocated from Hamilton to Waterloo, Ontario, was to visit one of the local branches of my local library and apply for a library card. I have long leveraged my local library not only for research in many of the nonfiction and fiction books I write, but I also take advantage of the unique spaces most libraries have where I can get work done. Here are a few questions to consider in relation to you and your local library. Do you have a library card from your town, city, or region's library? When was the last time you visited the local branch of your library? Have you investigated the digital resources that are available to you via your local library? If you haven't, I highly recommend that you take the time to see what your local library offers. I'm certain you'll be delightfully surprised. And who knows, perhaps you'll even be inspired in your own writing. The 3 A's of library strategy. In my book, An Author's Guide to Working with Libraries and Bookstores, I go into several pages of detail about how to make your work available to libraries, along with pricing strategies that you should use. But here, with a little bit of crossover information, I'll merely state the immense value that comes from ensuring easy availability of your books in as many formats as they are available. If your book is traditionally published, then there's a significant chance that your publisher already makes your work available to libraries. If they don't, I'd advise that you inquire with them about that. For every major format available to indie authors, print, ebook, and audiobooks, there's a way to get your book listed at the numerous library wholesalers around the world. These library distribution platforms are Baker & Taylor, Biblioteca, BorrowBox, Follett, Hoopla, Ingram, MLOL, Odillo, Overdrive, Palace Marketplace, Ulverscroft, Wheelers, Three Leaf Group. Most of these platforms are ones you can reach in different formats via distributors such as Draft Digital, Ingram Spark, and Findaway Voices, among others. Availability is, of course, the first important step. But once your titles are listed in the catalogs that libraries purchase from, then your next step is focusing on awareness and acquisition. I'm going to focus on those two elements simultaneously because of the way they go hand in hand and play so well off one another. Because just having your book listed as available to a library does not necessarily mean that libraries will even see or order your book. So, how do librarians find out about what books are available? What inspires them to want to bring a book in to make it available for their patrons? One of the ways is via reviews from online and print magazines that many libraries subscribe to, such as Booklist, Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, School Library Journal, and Voya. Getting your book listed in and or reviewed in one or more of these resources is likely to increase the chances that a library is going to be aware of and order it. But getting listed in such places is not always easy, and some can cost you hundreds of dollars. Remembering that libraries exist to provide products that patrons are regularly engaged in, it's likely that librarians will most often be looking for commercial fiction and nonfiction titles that are likely to appeal to a broad range of people. But actually visiting the library and seeing which titles they merchandise on the most prominent shelves will also give you a good idea of what resonates with their patrons. Better yet, actually talking with library staff about what customers are asking for can give you a more comprehensive idea of what's currently hot. This might be an opportunity for looking for tie-ins between what is currently in high demand and what you have available. For example, during the summer of 2003, when the movie Oppenheimer was a box office sensation, was the perfect time for my friend Robert J. Sawyer to ensure that libraries and bookstores were keeping his recent alternative history novel, The Oppenheimer Alternative, in stock. Similarly, with Barbie the movie being all the rage, your novel that carries themes of feminism and toxic masculinity might have been perfect for merchandising opportunities. Or, while the Dune movies and Dune Prophecy television show are being talked about far and wide, it might be useful for libraries to consider a far future science fiction novel from you, a local author. Or perhaps your romance novel involves a major football star, but not a world-class pop sensation. Maybe your character is a small-town girl dealing with a huge number of misguided people thinking she's taking advantage of his fame. It wouldn't, therefore, be difficult to tie that in with the buzz surrounding the 2024 Super Bowl and the much-focused-on relationship between Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. I hope you understand what I'm getting at here. Without stretching reality, it may be possible to find ways that a hot trending subject area or pop culture phenomenon relates to something within you or one of your books. And if that book, which contains some of the elements that can connect to some recent zeitgeist, is one that originates from a local author, then that increases the chances that your local library might be more interested in carrying and featuring your titles for local patrons. What you can do for your library. Pitching a book to your library is not all that different than pitching it to a bookstore, so I'm not going to repeat a good portion of that same advice here. You can go back and read that chapter, or you can go back and listen to the previous episode of this podcast. But it's worth remembering that, like booksellers, librarians are not likely to know the names of any major indie author, superstars authors. Those names who are household names in an indie author's realm, you know, the ones we hear legends about and that we see on stage, hear on podcasts, follow on social media, and who shared sales reports in author groups of their 6- and 7-figure incomes practically make our eyes pop. They are virtually unknown in the larger world of books. Heck, many aren't even known all that well outside of the very high silos that exist within the self-publishing worlds themselves. This is not my attempt to make them seem any less successful than they are, but it's good to note that there are names of people who are practically celebrities in the indie author sphere that booksellers and librarians will have never heard of. That might seem frustrating or depressing, but I see it as an incredible opportunity. Because if your books contain elements that would satisfy the cravings that a mainstream reader reading those traditionally published authors crave, then once you get their attention, you're in a position to impress them with some excellent content that will fulfill their tastes. It's also worth noting that a library's mandate, though similar to a bookstore's, bears a significant difference. Bookstores need to sell books in order to pay the rent. libraries need their products and services to engage their patrons. And therein lies one of the main focuses when you approach a library. It's not just about getting people there who are interested in your book. Yes, that is a significant and important part of it. It's about getting people to engage in and use their local library. If that sounds like a lot of work, let me be clear. It is. I won't lie to you about that. But you likely already know that writing a book is hard work. So is generating interest for and marketing your book. And regardless of how fast you can write and get your books out into the world, it's that second part that involves a lot of long-term thinking. Just like with booksellers, it's about relationships with your local librarians. And it's about the things you can do in collaboration with the library to provide valuable content for the local community. The focal point for us as authors, of course, is usually our book. But within the library, that's merely one focal point. Yes, these are buildings that contain a significant selection of books, but over the decades they've become even more community-minded in terms of offering people access to other media, tools, and resources. If you're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed at that, I want to remind you of something important. You're a writer, a creator, a storyteller. Regardless of the genre or subject you write about, you're able to take a concept, idea, or process and write about it in a cohesive way that someone else can consume and learn from. Or you're able to imagine people, places, and events that captivate someone else who reacts as if they were all real. If there's anyone who should be capable of creative problem solving in this case, you're likely among the top candidates. The challenge, I think, is that it's not straightforward. But it can be. A little later in this section, I'm going to share a few personal examples, and then I'll offer some generics. The point here is to show you how to start with whatever your book is or whatever your background or skill is and see if there's something that could be of use for library patrons. But first things first, let's look at your own familiarity with the library. Get to know your library. You first need to get to know your library. Think about this the way you would approach a date. You don't rush into a relationship without first getting to know a person. Whether it's small talk over a coffee or some other drink, a chat you have at the dog park, or the messaging back and forth on an online dating app. The usual process is exploring and learning a little bit about that other person and seeing if there are elements of compatibility. Depending on where you live, getting to know your local library can be simple, or it can be a bit more complicated. In some communities, there might only be a single, relatively small library. In other larger populations, a library might have numerous branches. There are pros and cons for each. Let's first explore some of the benefits of each, and then we'll return to ways to get to know your library. Small towns and communities. In a small rural area with a single, perhaps even isolated building that functions as the library for people from across a broad geographic area, there are likely going to be limits to the space and even resources that exist at that library. But, on the plus side, it could be an even more important hub or meeting place for that community. And your status as an author might help you stand out in some significant way. In my own experience, my hometown library, a population of about 2,000 people, and even the library in the larger city of 90,000 people, that's an hour's drive from where I grew up, has come with a hearty amount of hometown pride. I've been held up as a local author because I'm from that town, and yes, this is despite the fact that I haven't lived there full-time since I was 18 years old. The Levack-Onaping branch of my hometown library does not have a permanent Mark Leslie / Mark Leslie Lefebvre section or display, but they do have almost every single book I've ever published. And because of interlibrary loans, this location is part of the Greater City of Sudbury Library's Greater Sudbury Public Library System, encompassing a broad rural population of over 166,000 people, still small by many U.S. city standards. It's the largest city in Northern Ontario. The library has 13 branches and a landmass that makes it the 5th largest in Canada. A robust interlibrary loan system means that my books are easily available in physical form, as well as more easily available in ebook and audiobook formats across this broad region. I may only have a relationship with people and done events at perhaps 3 of those 13 locations, but because of the smaller and more remote aspect of that community, I'm a bit more well known than I am in larger urban centers in Ontario where I've lived, such as Ottawa, Hamilton, or even right here in Kitchener-Waterloo. Not to mention that the full-time library clerk at the Levack-Onaping branch is someone I knew back in high school and who I used to write humorous sketch comedy skits with for local high schools and other community events. There's no doubt that I likely come to top of mind whenever anyone is looking for books that contain true ghost stories, werewolf fiction, horror, 1980s movie trivia, or even books for authors. City libraries and large urban center libraries. In cities, you might not have that same smaller community aspect, but it is true that there can be pockets or areas within a larger city that are their own unique entities. I'm always impressed, for example, whenever I'm exploring New York City at just how distinct different neighborhoods can be from one another. There is a vibrant and a hearty identity to so many different places that are not so easy to even see or feel unless you've spent a bit of time getting to experience them. So even within a larger population, you can still have that local author aspect which you can play to. Another benefit of a larger population is that if things don't work out with the library that is closest to you, and perhaps they don't have complimentary facilities, offerings, or amenable staff members, you have options to get into other branches and work at building a relationship there. When I lived in Hamilton, I had a decent relationship with the branch of the library that I was closest to where I lived. When my child was young, we would go there almost every Saturday and spend hours in the children's section where he played with the other kids and pick out books for me to read to him. It was my branch, and I was intimately familiar with it. They carried my books, and I could do events there. Interesting note is that I still return to engage in at least one event every year with them, despite having moved about an hour away almost 8 years ago. This is because a local writers group who discovered me when I lived there keeps bringing me back in to do talks, presentations, and workshops with them. But I'd also regularly done events at 3 of their other 23 locations. Ways to get to know your library. There's no single way or hard and fast rule for getting to know your library, but here are some things to consider in your own approach or creating your own checklist. Get a library card and actually use it. In person, go through the process of looking up and checking out a book or perhaps other media like a DVD. Online or via an app, try looking up and checking out an ebook, audiobook, or some other digital asset like a movie. It's basic familiarity, but understanding the process of how your readers might acquire your books is a useful thing to know. Be curious and explore it. You're a writer, so chances are you're inquisitive and curious. Embrace that and wander around your library. See what they offer, check out the different sections, look at their displays and special features, wander among the stacks and see how things are laid out and where different types of books are. You'll likely notice that many libraries have a display that features their most common checked out books. Pay attention to that, as this will help you better understand what local community members are reading and potentially some of the comp authors you might have something in common with. Do research there. I've spent countless hours in libraries doing research on ghosts and hauntings from their main collection, their local archives, and checking out their microfiche and digital newspaper and magazine archives. Try writing or working there. Libraries have numerous desks in both open spaces as well as slightly more isolated study carousels and even small single-person rooms. If you enjoy writing in coffee shops, for example, find a spot where you can set up and write that's within the hustle and bustle you may enjoy to write in, or a more isolated location where you can get that work done. Attend an event as a patron. There are plenty of things going on at the library, and these events are posted on their website as well as in high traffic areas inside the library. Look for something that interests you so that you can understand how these events unfold. Is there a registration? Can people just show up? Where are the events held? It's also good to see if there are virtual/digital events as well as in-person ones. Book or leverage an in-person resource. The library often offers things like access to technologies like 3D printers, soundproofed recording studios, or even small or slightly larger meeting rooms. While working on a draft of this book, I was contacted by a couple of local college students who were doing their thesis about writers. They wanted to interview me in person about my life as an author. We met at the main branch of the Kitchener Public Library, where they booked a meeting room for 2 hours. That allowed a comfortable, closed-room space where they could record our conversation. Meet someone there. I just mentioned meeting up with students and using a private meeting room so they could interview me, but that same location of the Kitchener Public Library also has a gorgeous and beautifully architected open area with tables, chairs, and other furniture, as well as a coffee and coffee-adjacent treat corner. It's a perfect public meeting space, but also with the benefit of having the comforts of a local coffee shop. All of these things you do to better understand the library will certainly take time, but it'll ensure, as you're going through the exercise in the next section, that you'll be able to have a reasonable idea about whether your offering to the library is likely to be appealing to them. In addition, based on the resources and spaces they offer, you'll know if it's even logistically possible or within the realm of their existing programming. Things you can offer your library. As I mentioned earlier, libraries are all about providing a valuable service to the community. Therefore, when you're looking at what you can offer, consider how it delivers on that mandate. The first thing to do in considering what value you can bring to your library is to take a long and detailed look, not just a surface glance, at the books you've published or are working on, the research you might have done for writing, your other interests, hobbies, pursuits, and your experience and skills. Chances are there's more than one thing in there that you can offer. I'll start by considering my own books and experience and how that can lead to an offer. Then I'll try to look at a few for instance situations that other authors with different experience levels might be able to offer. The idea is that upon seeing these different ideas, you'll be inspired to come up with something that's suitable for you and your experience as a person and a writer. So yes, while the exploration I'm about to give might seem self-indulgent and rather exhaustive, I'm sharing in detail because I hope it allows you to consider numerous aspects of your own life, experience, and passions. Yes, even if they don't at first seem to be related to your books. I also encourage you, once you've read through my examples, the various elements I've made note of, and how they lead to different ideas of things I can offer, that it inspires you to either grab a notebook or open a document on your computer and start listing off your own elements. Here are the elements that I suggest you explore as a guideline to get started. If within any of those you feel the need to break things down further, try it out. You might be surprised what you discover. Elements to offer. Writing, element 1, background and length of time. Writing, element 2, publishing, experience, credits. Writing, element 3, genres, types of writing. Writing, element 4, themes, topics explored. Career and education, yes, even things that have nothing to do with your writing. Hobbies and passions, any of the things you really enjoy and spend your time doing. Personal, think about where you grew up, any unique things that happened in your life. Now here's a high-level look at me broken down to look at my experience as a writer within my career, education, and hobbies, as well as my personal life. Writing. Element 1, background. I've been writing with the intent to publish for 40 years. My first story was published in a magazine in 1992. My first professional story sale was in 2001. My first book, which was self-published, was released in 2004, and my first traditionally published book came out in 2006. Element 2, experience, credits. I have published just under 40 books, with experience on both the traditional and self-publishing side of things. I've also edited a dozen anthologies. Element 3, genres. The genres I've written include horror, thriller, urban fantasy, science fiction, romantic comedy, humor, trivia, and true ghost stories. Element 4, themes. Common themes, elements, and situations that I've explored in my fiction and ghost story nonfiction include fear the unknown and unseen threats, identity and duality, morality and responsibility, obsession and madness, the supernatural and reality, isolation and loneliness, love and relationships, dark humor and irony, good versus evil, reluctant hero, fish out of water, ghostly encounters and hauntings. Themes in my books for writers include the business of writing and publishing, self-publishing versus traditional publishing, common traits in successful authors, collaboration and networking, professionalism and long-term mindset, publishing widely and leveraging your author IP. Themes in my movie trivia books include 1980s and nostalgia, humor and parody, books that appear in movies and television, scripts versus what was filmed and what was cut, connections from one film to another via the talent involved in creating them. Career and education. I graduated with a BA Honors in English Language and Literature from Carleton University in 1992. I acquired my Master of Arts in Creative Writing with a focus on publishing from Western Colorado University in 2024. My work in the book industry started in 1992 as a part-time bookseller. Over the years, I've worked as a bookseller, bookstore manager, book data expert, and author, publisher, partner, liaison for the following types of stores: indie, mall, street side, campus, big box, online, and ebook. In addition, I have experience in book printing in both physical and digital distribution, and as a book industry author, speaker, representative, and digital publishing advocate. I ran Canada's second and the world's 9th espresso book machine print-on-demand services from a bookstore that I managed back in 2009. And in 2011, I was hired by Kobo to come up with a solution for serving self-published authors and created the Kobo Writing Life platform and team. Because my career and my life in writing mingle so well, I've benefited from a tremendous complementary crossover of experiences. I've held the role of President of the Canadian Booksellers Association and been a board member of multiple book industry companies and associations, including BookNet Canada, Sheridan College's Writing and Publishing Honours Degree Program, Superstars Writing Seminars, and Wide for the Win. My roles have led to being a spokesperson for booksellers and indie authors on numerous radio and television programs, as well as interviewing internationally recognized New York Times best-selling authors. I've even handed Lifetime Achievement Awards to Margaret Atwood and Alice Munro in my role with the Canadian Booksellers Association. In 2024, I became one of the prestigious judges of Writers of the Future on a panel that has included and still includes science fiction and fantasy authors I grew up reading. Hobbies and passions. I'm a lifelong book nerd. I started with comic books. I'm still a sucker for Spider-Man because I've always closely identified with Peter Parker, the loser nerd. I have read voraciously since I was young and was often more comfortable with my nose in a book than anywhere else. One of my favorite quotes comes from Cicero, who said, "A room without books is like a body without a soul." I have experience in theater that includes acting, writing, directing, stage management, lighting design, sound design, set construction, and teaching. That passion started in high school when I was writing and acting in comedy skits and continued through my university and several post-university years with a couple of theater companies in Ottawa. I'm a big fan of craft beer, and I've been tracking and rating beers on a dedicated app since 2013. Since then, I've rated well more than 7,000 beers across North America and several countries in Europe. I have an affinity for remembering and quoting song lyrics, as well as lines from Monty Python films and skits, The Simpsons, and classic TV shows and movies from the 80s that include Cheers, Perfect Strangers, John Hughes movies, Die Hard, The Terminator, and more. I enjoy eye-rolling puns and stupid dad jokes. Rush is still my favorite #1 band that I still nerd out to, but I'm a fan of an eclectic selection of music. Back in the 80s and early 90s, I DJ'd high school dances, weddings, and company parties. My partner and I enjoy traveling together and exploring various locations via long urban walks and exploring on foot. We also enjoy long hikes, running, and playing squash. When I was young, I loved playing hockey and have had a lot of experience from my youth on snow machines, as well as fishing in a boat, onshore, and ice fishing. Personal. I grew up in mid-northern Ontario in a small mining town called Levack, with a single elementary school and high school. This was located about an hour's drive northwest of Sudbury, Ontario, the nickel capital of the world. I'm familiar with slightly remote locations adjacent to nature, and grew up being able to walk 2 to 10 blocks in virtually any direction from my home and be in the wilderness. I'm a white, heterosexual, cisgender male, French-Canadian by birth, but raised in a French/Polish family. Though I tried and can understand some French, it was never spoken in my childhood home, so I'm not bilingual. Though there was a time many years ago when I was able to have simple conversations in French. I was an only child, and I was adopted. In my 20s, I found my birth parents and was surprised to find my birth mother and birth father later married and had another child. I'm lucky to have had incredibly wonderful parents who are now both deceased. I also got to know my birth father before he died, and my birth mother is still alive and someone I'm still in touch with. They too are wonderful people I'm lucky to have in my life. I have epilepsy and suffered from seizures through most of my childhood. Fortunately, they were mostly controlled by medication, which allowed me to get my driver's license, and I grew out of them in my mid-20s. I recognize how lucky I am, particularly since one of my half-sisters has lived her entire life with a type of epilepsy that was not controlled by medication, and which has significantly impacted her own lifestyle. I'm still good friends with many of the friends I had when I was a child and in my early teens, and I have many dear friends I've met along my journey who live vast distances from me. I occasionally get the opportunity to spend time with them as I get to travel a lot as a writer and book industry representative. I went to school in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada's capital city, and spent about a decade there. I moved to Hamilton, Ontario to open up a Chapters big box retail store, and that's where my first wife and I bought our first house and started a family. After more than 20 years in Hamilton, I moved to Waterloo, Ontario, and shortly after this book is released, I'll most likely be moving across the country to be closer to a new grandchild. I still consider Levack, Sudbury, Ottawa, and Hamilton my homes, and I know that when I leave Waterloo, I'll likely also feel the same way about it. I am the parent of one adult child and stepfather to 3 other adult children. I am proud of the exceptional young people they all are. I recently became a proud grandfather to my wife's youngest daughter's baby girl. My first marriage ended, which caught me by surprise, but I consider myself lucky in many ways. First, we had some really good years together and have raised a young person we are both very proud of. I'm also fortunate to have experienced the end of something I thought would last forever, but be able to maintain a positive relationship with my ex-wife and father of my kid. I'm also extremely fortunate that once that relationship had ended, I found and met my current partner and wife, and to have found something truly special and unique in all the ways we both want to experience and make the most of life. Putting it all together for your offering. Whoa! Taking a step back, when I planned on sharing this exercise here, I did not expect to compile what works out to 5 full pages. But there it is. And in your own drafting of something similar, don't edit or censor yourself in your experience, as this is something you'll be doing for yourself. But notice how much time of what I wrote here wasn't really about the specific details within any of my books, but rather thematic elements in them. And for this exercise, I didn't really dig down all that deep. I just touched upon the most common/popular tropes. In your own outline, it's important to take the time to look in more detail at specific locales, themes, and elements that can be found in your writing. By the way, if you think I was being open in my own sharing, I most certainly was, but in the first draft, there were several more deeply personal things I wrote about, and then deleted. Those would be things I might be able to use, but that I didn't want to share in a public way. Similarly, you might come up with things that could be useful for offering in a talk or presentation or workshop at your local library, and other things you'd rather not share with the world. But back to how to leverage what you wrote. Consider all the perspectives and experiences and how that might become content for use in your own library offering. I'll try to break these down into different groups, areas, and realms, and to do that, I've scanned through what I just wrote for each and pulled out things that might be of interest, as well as identifying what the optimum audience might be. The bullets are simple ideas for topics or even titles for talks, and I'll limit the topics I list to 10 or under. In the first two, writing and career, for example, I could likely list 30 or more, but this should be enough to give you some ideas of topics you might add to your own offerings. Writing. The writer's journey and how it has changed over the 5 decades I've been writing. The pros and cons of both traditional publishing and self-publishing. Writing in more than one genre. The business of telling ghost stories. Werewolves, vampires, and other monsters. Writing urban fantasy. Writing short stories. An editor's perspective on writing and reading for anthologies. Scaring up ideas, the art and craft of horror writing. Humor writing. Research for nonfiction. Career and education, business of writing and publishing. So, you want to write? Ideas on where and how to get started. From idea to page to publication, today's publishing world. The evolution of the publishing industry, changes and trends I've tracked over 5 decades. Self-Publishing 101, what you need to know. Strategies for successful book marketing and promotion. An author's look at building relationships with bookstores and libraries. Helpful tools and resources for writers in the modern world. The importance of understanding copyright and intellectual property for writers. Understanding Kobo and Kobo Writing Life, Canada's answer to Kindle and Kindle Direct Publishing. Publishing your books direct to retailers versus using a distributor versus having a publisher. The pros and cons of each option. Hobbies and passion. How reading comic books turned me into a lifelong reader. Life lessons I learned from reading Richie Rich, Archie, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Wolverine, and Captain America comics as a kid. With great power comes great responsibility, an exploration of Spider-Man's history, legacy, and various television and movie adaptations. An introduction to craft beer and a look at the growth of this part of the industry. Reflections of a traveling beer nerd, adventures in craft beer and the people who both make and enjoy it. How DJing is like storytelling. Ghosts, beers, movies, and dad jokes, how I turn numerous personal passions into numerous books. Why Die Hard is a Christmas movie, and other great conversation starters. All the world's indeed a stage. Life lessons from the theater that I've applied to my life. Lifelong learning lessons. Why I went back to school to get my Master of Arts in Creative Writing at the age of 54. Personal life. Life in a northern town, growing up in mid-northern Ontario. Thank you for being a friend. An intimate look at lifelong friendships and creating new friends along the way. How Peter Parker, comic books, and books likely saved my life. Personal resilience. How epilepsy and neurodiversity have impacted my life. Adoption and family dynamics. My intimate experience in understanding nature versus nurture. The call of the book. How my passion for reading shaped 2 parallel lifelong careers. Get a haircut and get a real job. My mother's advice, how I took it, and how it shaped me. My boss is both a jerk and a great guy. An honest look at the ups and downs of working for yourself. Starting over in love. How the loss of a marriage in my mid-40s led to an unexpected and enlightening life experience. Everybody counts or nobody counts. How a mantra from a fictional character, Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch, has informed my personal and professional life. As mentioned, I stopped at a total of 10 ideas from each of these areas. While I have given plenty of talks derived from my writing and career, I haven't dabbled all that much in topics from my hobbies or personal life. But part of sharing my examples is to remind you that you and your offerings can go well beyond the books you're writing or have written, and dig a little deeper into things that you've experienced or that you're passionate about. But let's take a few, for instance, possibilities that might pop up in someone's online details and how that might be able to translate into one or more offerings. Here are some, for instance, examples. Beginning author. An author who feels that they have very little experience because they've just published their very first book, which is a biographical story of their mother's life. Ideas for subjects, talks, and content. Share the backstory of what it was about your mother's story that inspired you to want to write this book. Explain the process of writing a biography or memoir, including the research into your mother's own story or life. And how you learned about the world of publishing and the path towards getting this book published. Notice how it doesn't matter if this is traditionally published through a vanity press, or self-published. Example of a fantasy fan turned author. A writer who grew up on Tolkien novels, has read fantasy since they started reading when very young. They played D&D when they were a teenager, and now write epic fantasy and enjoys medieval cosplay. Here are some ideas for subjects, talks, and content. Talk about Tolkien's writing, how that inspired an entire genre of speculative literature, as well as this author. Research involved in writing epic fantasy or world building involved in creating the setting for this fantastical series. The return and prevalence of role-playing games and the way that these games are similar to the storytelling involved in writing. A look at cosplay and the logistics towards designing and crafting authentic-looking costumes and weapons. Here's an example for a full-time biologist writing science fiction part-time. A PhD researcher who spent decades working in biology, specifically as an ecologist, and was inspired to write her latest science fiction trilogy by a research article she came across in her field of study. Ideas for subjects, talks, and content? A talk about their specific field of study within biology and how the article they read inspired their trilogy. A look at dystopian and utopian fiction and the idea of throughtopian fiction as an alternative. Leveraging real science and cutting-edge research into speculative literature. I'm hoping that when reading these brief examples of authors and the content they'll likely be able to speak about, you perhaps came up with some of your own ideas on pitches that can be made to a local library. Yes, these are extremely short summaries. There are likely so many more details and intricacies of each of these authors and their unique situations, and that should only lead to more ideas about valuable topics they'd be able to speak about. Your books in the library. If the library is interested in having you come in to do some sort of event, chances are they'll acquire your book through whatever distribution channel where it's available. For many of the events I've done at libraries over the years, the online listing for the forthcoming event will often have a link to the listings for my book in that library's online catalog. And sometimes the branch where I'm appearing will have a featured display with a printed poster about the event and a few of my print books. Selling books in the library. There's sometimes an opportunity for selling copies of a book that is related to a talk or reading you're doing. Some libraries allow authors to bring in their own copies for direct selling. Other libraries might work collaboratively with a neighborhood bookstore. And still others might have their own systems for selling books. It's important to ask and understand how the library prefers to do these things. And it's often best to adjust to whatever procedure they prefer to follow. Remember, you want to make the experience of working with you as smooth and seamless as possible. Well, that's it for that. It's gone on long enough. It's filled out pretty much a full episode. The next section is called Scaling Your Results, and then the one after that is strategies for approaching your bookstore or library, but that's a whole other entire chapter. Let me know if you're interested. I would love to, continue to share some of those details, including, preparing for your events and doing a bookstore event and stuff like that. So happy to share those along the way. Just let me know if you find an episode like this useful. Other than that, that is it for this episode. There's plenty of reflections here and obviously plenty of personal sharing, but I hope to get back to some of the interviews that I have queued up for you. I'm so excited to share the insights that I can glean from some amazing people. But As I said, that's it for this episode. Until next week, and until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.